Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I am Deneen and this is Design by Denine. Today I am very excited to be hanging out with my friend Krafty Leeny for Leeny's Shabby Tuesday. I have a link to Leeny's video in the description box below, as well as to her channel, so definitely go and check her out if you don't already know and love her. Now, truth be told, I would not say that I'm a shabby chic kind of a person. I would consider my aesthetic to be closer to modern glam. So here is my best attempt at Shabby Glam. I will give you a step-by-step of how I got here, and hopefully you like it. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. I picked up this little wooden box from Michael's. It's kind of like a little jewelry box. The first thing that I did was to give it a coat of white acrylic paint, and I went with this acrylic paint because it's quite thick and I thought it would cover the wood quite well, because raw wood tends to suck up a lot of paint. On the outside edges, I wanted to do a blended paint finish, and because I am partial to shiny things, I am using metallic chalk paint to do the paint finish. So if you've never done a blended paint finish before, it's actually really easy. So you do your dark tone on the bottom. I'm using a rose gold. So my second color that I'm using for my blended finish is Rustoelum Metallics in Seashell. So the bottom coat of paint in the rose gold is still wet, and then I'm applying the light paint to the top portion. So it's going over top of my white acrylic paint, and I'm going to get a decent coat on there. You don't want it gloppy, but you don't want it really thin either. And then I went back in and added in a little bit more of my rose gold. So once both colors are on, you want to mist it using a mister, and the finer the spray for this, the better. And then you're going to use an oval chalk painting brush, which, well, they call it a chalk painting brush. I call it a blending brush. And you're just going to blend the two colors together. So you're going to, and what you want to do is, if you get too much of one color on your brush, you just use a rag and you wipe it off. So if you're getting too much of the pink into your white, just give your brush a wipe, clean it off. You don't have to clean it, just give it a wipe, and then start from the top and work your way back down into the other color. So whichever color you feel like you're getting too much of, just work from the other direction. And those are just the bits of wood grain showing through there that looks a little bit like little spots. So for the top of the box, I'm going to do a decoupage technique, and I'm going to do an iron-on decoupage technique. So to start with, I'm giving everything a coat of Minwax polycrylic in satin. For the sides of the piece, it's just protecting the blended paint finish, but for the top of the piece, it's an important step in the decoupage technique. So you want to get between probably 2 to 3 coats of the Minwax polycrylic. A foam brush works best for this. It doesn't give you lines in your finish. So you're going to want to have an iron ready, plugged in on high heat setting with no water. You don't want any steam, you just want a dry iron. And the paper that I'm using here is from Zazzle. I'll link to that below. And it is just a leftover piece that I had from a furniture project that I did where I used it to line the sides of the drawers. It's French script, which I think is quite shabby. For this process, you don't need to cut your tissue paper to the correct size. You can just lay it on top and just fold the edges down a bit. You're going to actually cut it using some sandpaper later. This step is really important. You're going to need parchment paper, not wax paper, but parchment paper. And you're going to want to lay a piece of that on top of your tissue paper that's large enough to cover the whole thing before you iron. And then we just iron. So you want to iron, sort of don't leave it in one spot too long because you might get some burning or browning. And once you're complete, you're going to want to check around and make sure that all the edges are adhered down. If they're not, replace your parchment paper and iron it again to make sure that all those edges are nice and secure. So as I mentioned, you are going to actually cut the edges of the paper using a sanding block. You're going to use a sanding block that has a higher grit, like a 120 or a 240. You don't want any 60 or 80, that'll rip your paper. And then you're just going to run it back, just lightly back and forth, and it's going to cut through and make a perfect edge. The next step in the decoupage process is to put another coat of Minwax polycrylic over top of your ironed on tissue paper. Make sure you give it a good stir, getting all the stuff on the bottom mixed in. Avoid shaking your stain as it makes bubbles. A sponge brush is going to give you your best finish when you're working with stains or clear coats. You want to get a good coating on there. You don't want to oversaturate it, but make sure that you get everything coated. And in case I didn't mention it earlier, when you're doing your coat of polycrylic before you put your tissue paper on, it's really important that you have no bare spots because that is where your tissue paper won't stick. Notice that you're going to see that the tissue paper is going to start to bubble up, and don't let that stress you out. That's supposed to happen. We are going to fix this up shortly. Once the tissue paper is thoroughly dry, you're going to re-iron the piece using parchment paper, and that should flatten all those wrinkles out. So this is where you're going to find out if you missed any spots on your initial coat of polycrylic, because if there were any dry or missed spots before you put the tissue paper on, it's not going to stick. So that's why you're going to want to do those 3 coats initially. And don't forget your parchment paper because it's got glaze on it and it will stick to your iron and it'll ruin your piece. So if everything went according to plan, your decoupage is going to be beautiful and perfectly flat. Okay, it is time to decorate, which is the fun part. So although I am trying to stick to closer to the shabby chic style, I'm going to do it with a touch of glam. So maybe we'll call this Shabby Glam. This is Dollar Tree adhesive trim, and it's in a small kind of a flower shape or a rhinestone shape. And I'm going to run a row of this all the way around the top of the box. Next, I'm going to add in these little Dollar Tree dots. At least I'm pretty sure they're from the Dollar Tree. The sort of pinkish tones mimic the rose gold on the box. Time for some butterflies. Truth be told, I just was digging around in my craft stash trying to find things that I thought would work, and I happened to have a couple sheets of rhinestone butterflies. So the butterfly sheets actually came with a really pretty trim piece along the edge. It's kind of part pearls and part rhinestones, and it's very delicate and very pretty. So I'm going to take a row of that and I'm going to run it around the outside upper edge of the box. For the next piece, I used these little gems that I got from the Dollar Tree in the bridal section or the wedding section. They're a cool application if you want to use something swirly that's got a bit of a pearl accent to it. But a word of warning, they are super fidgety to work with. For some reason, they didn't make these in like one solid piece of adhesive backing, so they tend to want to stick to themselves and they're hard to keep in the correct shape. But having said all that, they look really pretty when they're done. So if you're willing to take the time to fidget around with them, you should use them. As always, I take the time to sort of test it before I take anything off the backing to figure out which direction I want things to go. So as you can see, as I mentioned, it's not really conducive to easy application. As always, when I find something is difficult to apply or is small and fidgety, I usually stick it to my X-Acto blade, and that makes it a little bit easier to handle. But as you can see, it's sticking all over the place. Anyways, fast forward, here goes the pain. Ta-da! They're quite pretty when they're done, but definitely a bit fidgety. And also, if you're applying them to something that's going to rip, I wouldn't use them. With this wood finish, I was able to peel them back off and put them in place without ripping anything. Since Shabby Chic is a lot about layering, I am adding in some more pearls, and I'm using these Adhesive Pearls from Dollar Tree. So I didn't want to go all the way around with these. I'm just applying this extra layer into each of the corners opposite the butterflies. So I put a row down and then I trimmed it back to the desired length. In order to get the other piece the same length, I measured it while it was still on the backing and then just cut it to size, and then you're guaranteed that you've got the same size piece. This is the back of the box, and as you can see underneath the latches, I added in 2 of these little ring pieces from the bridal embellishments. So in the interest of showing you what didn't work, I did at one point add this trim on, which I think is super pretty. However, when I had it all the way around the top of the box, it just seemed like a bit too much. So I got rid of it and went with something different. Just thought you'd like to see my editing process. So what I did end up doing instead was I took some of these edge trim pieces from the butterfly rhinestones and I just applied these on the corner sections all the way around the box. And I used one of the slightly longer pieces in the middle section. And one thing that I should mention is because I put a coat of polycrylic on top of my paint, it's making it much easier to move stuff around and none of my paint is peeling off. So that's a step you might not want to leave out if you're doing this project. At this point I decided that it needed just a bit more, I call it layering in the corners. So since my heart is a shiny blingy person, I'm adding an inside section of rhinestones. I find when working on projects or crafts, one of the most challenging aspects is when to stop and when to keep adding. So the beauty of that is, as a viewer, you can decide which pieces you want to add, which pieces you want to omit, what things you might do differently, and yours will be exactly the way that you want it to be. Ultimately, I decided it needed just one more thing, so I added these pearls, these pearl beads, which I got in a bag from Dollarama. They're non-adhesive, so I'm using E6000 to attach them. If you look down at the right-hand corner, you can see how I've laid them out. And another trick that I find helpful is to just use a bamboo skewer, and that way you don't get glue all over your hands and it's easier to place them using the bamboo skewer. And here is my Shabby Glam bejeweled box. If you like the tray or the candlesticks, I'll link those videos down below as well. Now make sure you head on over to Leeny's channel and tell her that Deneen sent you.